Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are letting everybody slowly join us in today's webinar series. So please feel free to just relax for a minute. We'll get started in just a second. Thank you so much for joining us. And please feel free as you join us, please write in your name, your role and organization, and also where you're from. We want to get to see who's joining us here today in today's webinar series. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll give another minute for everybody to get a chance to sign in. Welcome, Brittany from Texas. Thank you for joining us. Awesome. Hi, Cesar from Curtin Services in California. Welcome, welcome. We have California in the house representing here. Hi, Diana, also from Health Linkages in Lone Park, California. Thank you so much for joining us. Such a great opportunity to be here with you guys today. Hello, Lorena. She's a coordinator at MPUSD in Monterey, California. Lindsay from San Joaquin County. We have individuals from Santa Barbara here. Thank you so much. Hi, Cynthia from San Jose, California. She's a school social worker. Lots of folks joining us from California. All right, so we're going to get started. Thank you so much for joining us here today with our launch of our webinar, three-part learning webinar series, The Needs and Joys of Our Immigrant Students, Families, and Community Partners, Expanding Our School Mental Health Practice. We're hoping that today's going to be an interactive session for you, an awesome learning opportunity. It's such a great topic, very relevant to what's happening today. And we also invite you to ask any questions during the session. Please post them in the chat box. We're going to do our best to address all the questions that are coming in today. But if we're not able to answer all your questions, we're going to do a follow-up as part of our follow-up with the email as well. We just also want to remind everybody that today's presentation is being recorded. And we're also going to be sending out the slide deck along with any of the handouts here today. And we also have a wonderful resource page in regards to supporting immigrant students as well. And again, we want to just kind of remind you that everybody's muted here today. And also the conclusion of the webinar, we're going to ask that you're going to provide us some feedback in regards to how we did today as well. Next slide. And Libby's going to give us a little rundown of the Zoom webinar experience today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Angela. So just a quick refresher on how to use the Zoom webinar interface, not to be confused with the Zoom meeting interface. So apologies for that typo here. But on the Zoom webinar interface, this is where we strongly encourage folks, all participants, to use the chat box as this is the means to communicate with fellow attendees, fellow participants, as well as to communicate with the panelists. So any questions, any reflections, any wonderings, comments, feedback, please do share them in the chat box. And when you do so, if you can just make sure that the setting in your chat box reads to panelists and attendees. You can also have the option of just sending something to the entire group. That would be excellent. We would really appreciate that. And at the very bottom, if you're a little unfamiliar with the chat box or Zoom, on your Zoom navigation bar, you should see a little bubble below it. It says chat, and that will then open up the chat box. And you can then send out your thoughts and questions and reflections via chat. And if you would like the speaker or presenter to slow down, or if you have a question, you can also use the raise hand feature. When you select that, you have a bunch of possible opportunities there or different reactions. So that would give the facilitators an idea that we can either slow down or pause. So that is a quick refresher on how to use Zoom. If you have any questions on Zoom, having any difficulties, please let me know. My name is Livia, and I'm providing tech support on today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Livia. Very nice information about the webinar experience, because I know that sometimes we get confused with all the different functions on that. If you can go to the next slide, please. I just want to make sure everybody's here at the right place, right? So you are here for part one of the three-part learning opportunities that we have. And today's webinar series is entitled, What is the What? Nuances, Complications, and Contributions of Immigrant and Latinx Student Mental Health. I want to also take the time to thank the speakers and also the team that helped to put this together. And a big thank you to all of you to carving out your afternoon to be here today. We hope that this is going to be an exciting session for you, a learning experience. And again, we want to learn about what your experience is as well within your school districts or your community also. So we're both in a learning mode also. Next slide. Today's presentation is part of the Pacific Southwest Mental Health Transfer Technology Center under the cooperative agreement from SAMHSA. Today is being supported by SAMHSA. These words are our own, even though we know they are being supported by SAMHSA as well. And this is our general disclaimer that we have. And again, just a reminder that the presentation will be recorded and it's going to be posted on our website as well. Next slide. Here is the lovely map display in the centers that make up the MHTTC centers. And so as you can see, we have an array, large 10 regional offices within the United States and the Pacific Southwest. Is that section 9, that green section that you see there, that covers Arizona, California, Hawaii, Nevada, and Pacific Islands. And so please visit any of the centers so that you can actually access and see some of the resources that we're able to provide. Next slide, please. And this particular slide covers all of the different services that we offer, no-cost training, technical assistance, and resources. So if you visit visit the website, you can actually see an array of different resources available through our center. Next slide. The MHTTC network uses affirming, respectful, and recovery-oriented language in every activity that we do. As you're seeing this particular slide in front of you, there's a lot of different wonderful phrases. And what we want to do is actually have you just kind of take a look at this particular slide and ask that you pick one that really resonates with you, that you want to reflect on and apply to the dialogue that we're going to have today. For me, I'm going to be choosing the strength-based and hopeful because we're really going to be, just having a nice discussion about some of the resources related to our immigrant families. And also the hope is that we're going to be providing that information that it's useful to the schools and communities that you offer and support services for our immigrant youth. Next slide. Well, now that we have gotten that out of the way, I want to take a look at the presenters here today. During this particular coordination of the presentation and the webinar series, I've gotten to learn to get to know these wonderful experts here. And so we have Claudia Rojas, she has a lot of experience. All of us have a lot of experience. I think a combined experience of probably about 40 years of supporting newcomers, Latinx students. Claudia Rojas is a newcomer coach. She has previously served as a restorative justice teacher and advisor. She also served as a founding high school principal located in the heart of South Central Los Angeles. The school really focused specifically on mental health and behavioral health and was student-centered, teacher-driven school. She's very committed to student voice and justice, equity and access, innovation and community and collaboration. We also have Claudia Gonzalez, who's a lead child and adolescent mental health clinician at a federally qualified health center in South San Diego. She has a master's in social work and PPSC credential from San Diego State University, and she has over 10 years of experience working along the US-Mexico border close to her hometown of San Isidro. Her personal experience and work in the border region had really afforded her the opportunity to understand and connect with the intersections of community and social, sexual, and family ties in both countries. Alisa Arambola she's also a Latinx school social worker in South San Diego region as well. And she also has an MSW and a PPSC from San Diego State University. And she also has worked over 10 years serving youth and families in a variety of different capacities, including substance abuse, immigration, and education. She considers herself as fronteriza, which is a hybrid culture that exists within border regions that directly impact her theoretical approach in serving her community. And I'm Angela Castellanos, and I have had the experience of being a school social worker. I've worked in a lot of different capacities as a school administrator as well. And I think one of the biggest pieces that I bring to the table today or a conversation is that I'm also an immigrant. I came from El Salvador, and I tried several times to get to the US, and it was a long time ago. But the other piece too is that most recently I've had the opportunity to go to my country of origin and provide some trauma-based education and work in El Salvador. And that was such an amazing opportunity to be able to offer that piece. And so we are so excited here today to have you join us to have this discussion with, in regards to all of these different resources that we're going to talk about today. So thank you guys for being here. Next slide. And so as we look at the agenda, we're going to take you through a journey of not just the migration journey experience, but also just to help understand the policies that impact our students and families. We're also going to have a conversation about what does that trauma, the triple trauma, really impact our students. There is a process that students experience, students and their families, if they do have, come with a family member as well. We're going to talk about the COVID-19 and the impact on some of the service delivery that we have, we're offering within the community. But lastly, we're going to leave you with, some student development and have a conversation about how to enhance some of that resilience that all of our immigrant students bring. The next slide, these are our objectives for today's webinar series. We're going to learn about how stress and anxiety and trauma impact our immigrant students. We're also going to define the policies, right? Because these are some really important pieces that we as school clinicians or school social workers or school leaders really need to learn about, and how do they impact the work that we do as well. And also how we're going to explore how status affects students, families, and schools as well. Before we get started, one of the pieces as we were developing this, the agenda and the information, I know that we're all inundated with attending a variety of different distance learning opportunities and trainings. And so what we wanted to do is do a couple of different things. If you could go to the next slide. We are going to talk a little bit about reflecting and connecting. So there's two purposes to this. One is that there are going to be different pieces that we are going to be introducing to you today. It is very sensitive information, so this may actually bring some triggers for individuals, because we are going to talk about trauma experience and different examples that we're going to take you through. So it's very important that you do take the time to pause, to make sure that you take care of your well-being. So if there is, something like that does happen, just, give yourself that permission to pause and then join us back when you're ready as well. The other component here is that we also created a learning tool that we are going to put in the chat. And this particular learning tool is going to help us, kind of gather the information, right? Document some of the different ideas or takeaways that you're going to learn from today. And also, I probably understand that some of you may be a part of a team at a school site. And so maybe not your entire team is here today. So you're going to be able to take this information and these ideas to have a discussion at your school sites and how to enhance some of the already existing services, or maybe some services that you are going to be enhancing at your school site. So it's really just like a nice opportunity for this tool for you to, jot down some ideas. I know that when I've attended different webinars, I don't remember where I put all my notes, but this is a nice way for us to really just connect and get that information out there as well. So thank you, Olivia, for putting that information in the chat. If you could please go to the next slide. So I know that I've seen a couple of different individuals writing their information in the chat. So please, continue to write in your organization, the role and location. We really want to get to know who's in the webinar here today. The other piece that we ask that you're going to do is that in order for us to get a good idea as far as like what kinds of expertise that are out there, we want you to kind of jot down what your comfort level is in providing school mental health supports to newcomers, transporter, and Latinx students. And so if you're going to rate yourself, if you write in a 3, you're going to say, I'm an expert. I know what I'm doing. You can rate yourself at a 2. You can say, it's basically saying, give me the resources and I got it from here, right? And then number 1, don't know why I'm here. I was voluntold to be at this webinar. I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm willing to learn. So that's a 1. So it looks like we have a lot of 2s here in the audience here. So it's really nice to see that there are some resources and there's a engagement of that interest and curiosity to learn more. So we're hoping to learn from you as well. So it looks like there's a lot of experience. So before we get started, the next piece is that, I mentioned that we're going to take you through a journey. We're going to, showcase a video of a documentary that was created by Kayla Mulholland in 2019. And this gives us a really good idea in regards to what the process is for or experience of these 2 little boys that actually came to the United States in their experience in coming to the United States. And so Livia's actually getting that ready for us, but I want you to kind of take a couple of different things, pick out a couple of different things that kind of stood out to you, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this piece. So go ahead and play the video.
Porque no les dio cuchara, ni cuchillo, ni tenedor.
Ya llegó la casa. Y aquí dice, pues allí donde yo estoy, siempre está mi casa. Entonces, quiere decir que tu casa la llevas aquí adentro. A donde tú llegues vas a tener una casa.
Me preguntaron por qué saliste de tu país, por qué no buscaste otro país, por qué te viniste hasta aquí, por qué buscaste esta frontera. Un día me cansé y fui a ver si podía declarar, y en eso me encuentro las 3 personas que mataron a mi esposo. Entonces viene él y me dice que me fuera de ahí porque iba a tener problemas, que a mí me andaban buscando para matarme y a mis hijos. Pues así fue como yo salí del país, huyendo de lo que me querían hacer y lo que me pasó.
Ahí están
Pero te fijas, ¿dónde lleva su casa? ¿Dónde la
echando
lleva?
humo.
¿Pero dónde está la casa?
Ahí en la cabeza.
En su cabeza. ¿Y tú dónde llevas tu casa?
En la cabeza.
¿Tú en la cabeza? ¿Cómo
Yo
es
la
tu
llevo
casa?
en el corazón.
Tú la llevas en el corazón. ¿Y cómo se siente?
No sé.
¿Cómo se siente tu casa? Cierra los ojos. Cierra los ojos así. Imagínate tu casa. ¿Cómo es tu casa? ¿Hace frío o hace calor? ¿Está oscuro o hay mucho sol? ¿Cómo es? Dime. ¿Tú? ¿Cómo es tu casa?
Ya lo pensé.
A ver.
Mi casa es con árboles bonitos ahí y hay muchas frutas y ¿cómo se llama? Hay una playa ahí y mucho sol. Ahí siempre llevaban mis amiguitos y bañaban. Sí, y había mucho sol.
Mucho sol.
Porque el sol mucho me gusta. Él recalienta.
Sí, recalienta.
Como la canción, solecito, calienta un poquito. Y mañana, toda la semana, lunes, martes, miércoles, jueves, sábado y domingo.
Teníamos que ir a dejarlo a la escuela porque tenía miedo también de salir. En Honduras disparan al aire y le meten miedo a la gente. Como el papá lo mataron en las protestas de Juan Orlando y ellos miraban.
Cerramos, abrimos, cerramos, abrimos, cerramos, sacudimos. Arriba. Sacudimos. Arriba.
¿Tú sabes? ¿Tú sabes a dónde vas a ir?
Para la USA.
¿A la USA?
Vamos a pedir jalón para ir allá.
Vas a pedir jalón.
Sí.
Oye, pajarito, ¿tú vas a volar así con tus alas y así te vas a ir a Estados Unidos?
Sí.
Sí, a ver, ¿cómo?
Allá en la seguridad es... no existe. No existe. Y aquí pues es diferente, es súper diferente la vida. Ya cuando lo bajaron del carro, me preguntaban los niños dónde estábamos, y otro le, ay, estamos en la USA. Y entonces ellos se sintieron tan tranquilos, tan felices que ya desde allí les cambió el momento. Y es otro mundo, ya puedo divagarme con mis hijos, salir y sin ningún miedo. Todavía falta ir a ver el juez el 23 y a ver qué nos dice. Dios todavía no ha terminado con nosotros.
So as you're viewing this particular video, I think for me, one of the things that really stood out, or one word that I can describe this particular experience, was hope, or hopeful, right? So, we invite you to write in the chat or in your reflection tool to write something specifically. What did this inspire? What did this particular video resonate for you? This particular video and experience, we're actually going to take you through their journey throughout this entire webinar series. If you can go to the next slide. Resilience. Yes, that's another good word, resilience. And we're going to talk about that today for sure. And so in the next slide, so some of the things that we heard about Luis and Jose's story, and it's not just Luis and Jose. Luis and Jose represent all of the different students that we work with on a day-to-day basis. And so we're going to take you through their journey, but it's also going to resonate some of the different students that you might be working with as well. So as you saw in the video, Luis and Jose are two young boys who fled Honduras with their mother due to violence. They witnessed their father's murder during one of the protests, and mother was also threatened as she experienced her, she said that she was going to declare herself. And so she experienced a threat, right, to her life as well. And so there was fear of going outside. Also, some other pieces that we talked about, there was the students, Luis and Jose, also had some fear in going outside. Like she mentioned that she had to walk them to school. So any kind of noise, right, that they would hear, they would be fearful about. And so thank you so much for writing in all that information in the chat. I see resilience and I see other different strength-based words that were descriptive to describe their experience, right? So as we're thinking about some of the things that Luis and Jose experienced, we're going to take you through that journey along the way today. Next slide, please. And so this particular list, in order for us to ground ourselves and kind of speak the same language in this sense, right? We're going to be mentioning different words. We talked about Florentiza already. We talked about transporter. So this is a nice list of definitions. There's a lot of, one of the things that we do want to kind of point out as well, that we are not immigration specialists, but we do want to acknowledge that newcomers are a highly heterogeneous group who come from all over the world. Right? They start a new life, and that's one of the things that mom kept mentioning, right? She kept saying, La vida aquí es diferente. Life here is different, right? So they bring their customs, religions, and languages with them. And we also have heard a lot of different terms in relations to immigrants and newcomers, generally to refer to students who are, foreign born, who have recently arrived to the United States. But this is a nice list that outlines the various terms by various entities in describing newcomers as well. So just kind of set the tone for us today. Next slide. Throughout the 21st century, immigrants have arrived to the United States from a variety of different countries. And so the top 9 countries of origin most represented amongst unaccompanied refugee minors are represented in the slide here. And Lydia's going to put that up in a second. And according to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, these are the top 9 countries. So we have number 1, Guatemala, up to number 9, which is El Salvador, right? And so we know that they come, unaccompanied minors and their families, immigrant students and families, they come to the United States for a variety of different reasons. And we'll get through some of those different reasons in a second. But this is a nice list to see so that we're able to understand which parts of the world most of our students are coming from. And in most recent years, unaccompanied minors are arriving from what is referred to as the Northern Triangle, which is the next slide. And what the Northern Triangle represents is Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. And this is the region that you're kind of seeing here again. And again, there's really no single reason why, what drives unaccompanied minors or immigrant students and their families to come to the U.S., but there's a number of different factors. And we see in Luis and Jose's story, some of those different factors, right? So we saw there might be some, crime or violence going on in the country. Maybe perhaps they experience some domestic violence. They could also experience the murder of a loved one or disappearance as well. Sometimes children are recruited by criminal groups as well. When I went to El Salvador, I think one of the major pieces that the parents really feared which is very a true fear for them, is that every day they would worry about their kids going to school, because a lot of times they would kidnap the kids to participate in any kind of criminal groups as well. And so these are it's not an exhaustive list, but there's a lot of different reasons. Again, abuse, poverty, hunger, the lack of resources. Again, mom kept mentioning, things are different here in the United States. So I can kind of I heard the word of opportunity for her, in a sense, just to have a different life as well. So we know that there's a lot of different reasons why they're coming to the United States. In the next slide, and even more recently, there's been an increase in unaccompanied children entering the United States. There's a lot of variety of different reasons, again, but also they're estimated that there's about 350 children that are arriving to the United States on a daily basis. So we know that this is a very timely subject that we're, having a conversation about. So definitely, it's important for us to understand these issues that are arising for our kids. And again, because there is an increase in students coming to the United States, immigrants play a crucial role in our schools. And in the next slide, as school leaders, we definitely play a crucial role in supporting their adaptation, right? So the integration into our school environment, we do have a lot of students that are coming. They're already here, but we have more students that are immigrating to the United States, and they're enrolling in their school. So it's really important for us as school leaders to understand what our role is in that acculturation process, right? We want to make sure that we understand the stages and how important it is, so that we can provide an effective educational opportunity to support students and families. There are a variety of different stages that we're going to get through today in regards to the arrival, the culture shock, the coping strategies, right? And then for us as school leaders, for us to understand these pieces, we're going to help our students feel supported, supporting their healing process, because what we're going to talk about the triple trauma and their experiences as they're going through their journey of migration to the United States. And also feeling a sense of connection and safety, right? That's increased once we are able to understand what that acculturation process looks like. Okay, next slide. And so the next piece, Claudia Gonzalez is going to take us through policies that impact our students and our families. Claudia? Claudia, if you could unmute yourself. Thank you.
Oh, there you go. Hi, Angela. Thank you everyone for being here. Thanks, Angela. I was saying the video that we just saw, Alicia, which is one of the other panelists here, both of us worked at that shelter that we just saw in that video. So we both had an experience of working there, which a lot of the reason and doing a lot of for so many years, so we work at the border region, has brought us this awareness about like what I'm about to talk about right now, about the policies that affect our immigrant community. So first, a disclosure that I'm not a legal expert or provide any legal expertise, but becoming familiar with the relevant policies impacting students can help us answer questions for our communities and better understand student stressors by creating awareness. So school mental health professionals can reach out to families who might need support and guidance, help refer families to appropriate free social and legal services available in the community. For example, here in San Diego, we have Catholic Charities that provides information to our immigrant community, completing like paperwork or updating their visas, things like that are completely free. Yet a lot of our community members go and pay for some of these services. So making sure we provide access and information about free services. And lastly, help reduce fear of accessing services. So a lot of our community, a lot of our students' families are fear, accessing services due to, the impact it could have on their immigration status. And one of the policies that I'm going to talk to you about today has that information. So as I mentioned, my personal experience doing some groundwork at the migrant shelter in Tijuana and my experience doing work in the border region has allowed me to realize how having awareness of policies that affect our community help me help them. So as a social worker, I think of a person and environment and how all the systems around them make an impact. So some of the policies that I'll share with you today can have a positive or negative impact in the immigrant community, consequently, an impact in the lives of our students. So if you can go to the next slide, Livia, please. So deportation. So what are deportations? These are the formal removal of foreign nationals from the US for violating an immigration law. The US may deport foreign nationals who participate in criminal acts, are a threat to the public safety, or violate their visas. So this is, just in a nutshell, this is what deportations are. And the next slide that I'm about to go into, if you can go to the next slide, Livia, please. So temporary protected status. So these are individuals that have the TPS, or temporary protection status, provides a temporary immigration status to nationals of specifically designated countries that prevent them from returning safely due to ongoing armed conflict, environmental disaster, or extraordinary temporary conditions. TPS does not lead to lawful permanent resident status. So in the slide, you'll see all the different dates of the expiration. So you can imagine these are communities, that are from these countries, as their TPS is about to expire. Obviously, the stressor gets bigger for them. It worsens the family stressor. So that's when what we just talked about, the deportations, they are subject to being deported once their TPS expires. So one thing to be on the lookout in regards to our TPS, people that do hold a temporary protection status, is Bill HR 6. So this bill is called the Dream and Promise Act of 2019. So grant holders legal permanent resident status and can cancel will cancel the legal proceedings, cancel the removal proceedings of these individuals. So this bill will help cancel the removal proceedings. And so just a little bit of background on it. This bill passed the House of Representatives on March 18th. And on March 22nd of this year, it was received by the Senate. So right now, one of the things that I do with my community, I try to empower them, letting them know about this bill. If I have any individual that I am aware of that is a TPS holder, so they can, be part of a movement, maybe call their senators or talk to their family about TPS, so create awareness about the bills that have an impact in their life. And I think one of the things that I see with the individuals that I work with, this empowers them to be able to they feel like they have a voice, they can do something about that. Okay, slide 4. If you go to the next slide, please, Livia. So this slide is a deferred action for early childhood arrival. So DACA, very familiar about our dreamers. So this is an immigration policy that allows deferred action for certain undocumented young people who come to the US as children and meet several guidelines to request consideration for deferred action. So this allows non-US citizens who qualify to remain in the country for 2 years, subject to renewal. So they are eligible to work for work authorization and shielded from deportation. So the Dreamers or DACA helps them, prevent them from being deported. So a bill, HR 6, which is the same one that I just talked about, the Dream and Promise Act, is another bill. The same bill will help them receive conditional permanent resident status for 10 years and cancel removal proceedings. So another reason why to learn more about this bill. We can, talk about if we have any dreamers in high schools that we're aware of. This is something that they might be help them, empower them. If you can go to the next slide, please, Livia. Thank you. So U visas. So U visas are for immigrants who have been victims of crime in the U.S. and have reported crime or assisted in the investigation or prosecution. So many immigrants don't report any injustices they've experienced due to fear. So this is one of the reasons that I was talking about fear at the beginning. So by having awareness of a U visa, we can help individuals report and apply for this visa, which would allow them to remain in the U.S. So some of the work that I did in the shelter in Tijuana and that I continue doing, just having the awareness that this visa exists, I can help individuals that are here as an asylee, as an asylum seeker, understand how if anything happened to them, if they've ever had been victim of a crime, that is something that can help them. And again, I don't provide any expertise, but I give awareness, and then they can talk to immigration lawyers about this. All right, if you can go to the next slide, please. So this slide is public charge. So this is another big for our community, big for our immigrant community. It has created a lot of fear. So this is referred to a public charge is referred to an individual who is likely to become dependent on government benefits for their survival. This is grounds in admissibility for which a person could be denied a green card, a visa, or admission into the U.S. So this is any of our safety net programs. So, people fear accessing CalFresh, CalWorks, Medi-Cal here in California, and all the other states have a different name for them. For any safety net benefits, a lot of our community members are scared of accessing them because of this public charge. So the Department of Homeland Security announced on March 9th of 2021 of this year that they will no longer defend the Trump administration's public charge rule. So this is one of the policies that our immigrant community fear due to the impact it can have on their immigration status. Many families go without safety net assistance they likely qualify for due to the fear they have. So I always talk to my patients, any patients that I'm aware that are undocumented. I ask those questions. I know they're sensitive questions, but really helping them so they can access services that they might be eligible for, letting them know that that's no longer in effect. If you can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this one's a Violence Against Women Act, VAWA. So this is available to victims of domestic violence when the abuser is a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident and is the victim's parent, spouse, or adult child. So I do have, individuals that I see as a clinician at my clinic that are afraid of asking for help because they are in a domestic violence relationship and they're scared of asking for help, because of their immigration status. So just simply by letting them know that there are laws, policies that are in effect that can help them. So just having that awareness, we can help them, take that step to get help if they're in this type of situation. So that's VAWA. Next slide, please. All right, so we have the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. So this is a federal legislation related to the education of children, youth experiencing homelessness, which includes those who are sharing housing, doubled up, staying in motels, trailer parks, shelters, or transitional housing, sleeping in their car, or in any type of substandard housing. So this federal law stands to ensure that homeless K through 12 students enrolled in school have the opportunity to succeed academically by removing any barriers that could hamper homeless students to access to an education. So some of the work that I've also done, I also worked at San Isidro School District, which is like the district closest to the border and where the town that I grew up in. I did some work there as well. And I experienced firsthand how this policy helped this population expedite their transfer to other schools, school registrations, and provide students with multiple supports in school, such as school supplies, tutoring, case manager to access safety net programs. So firsthand, I saw how this program was accessible to our immigrant population, really helped them in regards to their academic achievement. Okay, if you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so AB 2121, some of you might be more familiar with this policy. So this is public instruction, coursework and graduation requirements, migratory children and newly arrived immigrant pupils. So required educational edges. This bill requires educational agencies to take specific actions relating to migratory children and newly arrived immigrant students. So existing law requires school districts to exempt foster care, homeless, former juvenile court students from all locally adopted coursework requirements that are supplemental to statewide coursework requirements. So this bill, AB 2121, extends these provisions to migratory students and to students participating in English language proficiency programs designated for newly arrived immigrant students who are in their 3rd or 4th year of high school. So these are all different policies that I personally have, having this awareness has helped me better help the families that I serve. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Claudia. We do have a couple of great questions in the chat.
Yeah.
I know there was a lot of information, a lot of different policies that impact the work that we do. And so like Claudia mentioned, it's really important for us as school leaders to understand and learn about these particular policies. And one thing that came to mind, Claudia, when you were talking, is that today we're organizing another webinar, the upcoming webinar for parents specifically. And so we want to create like a diverse panel of parents. And I asked them, one of the things that is really pertinent in the community is that a lot of families, there's a big fear about asking for help. Some of the families live in like really very expensive housing environments, especially in Orange County. I would say like that's an example. But she did mention that there is a fear of the public charge or asking for support. And some of these families owe like $30,000 in rent because they don't have the resources or work to be able to pay for that. So it's really some of the additional stressors for some of the families as well. So one of the questions that's on the chat, it says, I was trained that students in custody of child welfare no longer qualify for McKinney-Vento. Is this specific to Arizona or is this a national requirement or new policy change? Do you know any information about that?
Let me see. I don't see the question, Angela. Is it on the chat box?
It's under the Q&A.
Okay, Q&A. Sorry, okay.
I know for me, when I was a McKinney-Vento liaison, that was one of the questions that would come up. And yes, in California, if a student enters the child welfare system, they can't have that dual identification because they're technically not homeless because they are placed in a foster care system that allows them to have those resources. I don't know if you wanted to add anything else to that.
To be honest with you, I know California, so I'm not sure about Arizona, but so I wouldn't be able to give you a good answer. But yeah, in California, this is the policy here, and specifically in San Diego, that is very strong. But I'm not sure about Arizona, to be honest with you.
We have another great question in the chat. It says, would these bills also apply to refugee students as well?
Yes, so if it applies, so any person, if any of these like VAWA or any of these things that might are affecting you, yes, they can apply.
Yeah, and I think one of the recommendations is to connect with your local legal agencies that are in the area. When I was a clinician and I worked for incarcerated youth, I was able to connect them to the pro bono attorneys in the community so that they're able to connect to assess to see if there are any particular policies that apply to their status, so they were able to stay in the country, not, get deported after, or get deported, or the fear of the deportation. So I think those are great questions. So thank you, Claudia.
Thank you.
For that wonderful review. And so we're going to go to the next slide and have a little bit of opportunity to just reflect a little bit. I know there was a lot of information of different policies. And as we're thinking about Luis, Jose, or any of the students that you're working with, if you can put it in you can actually think about this question and write it in your reflection tool, or you can also join us and invite you to write it in the chat. What are some possible stressors that may be impacting Luis and Jose as it relates to any kind of policies, right? And on the other hand, what are some policies that can actually support Luis and Jose, as Claudia mentioned, some of these different pieces. One of the things that came to mind when I saw the video is the anxiety revolving the court hearing, right? So she talked about, we have a court hearing that's coming up, and we just don't know what's going to happen, right? So there's still that fear, that 50-50 chance that I can stay in the country, or are we going to get deported? So there's still that anxiety piece, right? So as you're thinking about your own community agency, your school site, your school district, what are some different strategies that you can actually incorporate or maybe enhance that you already have in place to support immigrant students and families? Possibly, like I'm thinking more about the McKinney-Vento liaisons, right? Having knowledge about some of these policies, maybe connecting with your local legal representation. I know when I was a school coordinator or administrator is, exactly what Jennifer said, right? Having those referrals handy. Do we have enough referrals within the community? I know there was a really nice family resource center that had all of these pro bono attorneys, so they were able to get that legal support for free. So it was really nice to really create that. So, having those resources and referrals are very, very important. Nelida also mentioned having the resources, not only just the legal component, but also the basic needs, right? Because we have some families that are definitely afraid of asking for support, right? They don't want to ask for support because it might be in the process of becoming legalized in the country, and they still are not trusting the system just yet, So these are some of the different components. Psychoeducation, right? The supportive wellness centers to connect students and families with mental health counseling, right? So we have these pieces, but as it relates to our immigrant families, having those resources available, right? So it's really important for us to kind of take a look at that. So, we can have a conversation about this, but jot down your ideas, some resources and different connections on your reflection log. Next slide. Thank you for your participation on that information. So, now that we talked about the policies that impact our families, we're going to talk a little bit about what is this triple trauma, how does that impact the students and the families that we're working with, right? So there's a process that they experience when they're leaving, when they decide to leave, the migration process, and also the arrival to the United States. That's a continuous component. So in the next slide, we all as clinicians or school social workers, school psychologists, mental health leaders, we have an idea or a definition of what trauma means, right? So, but we know that there are variations of different definitions of what trauma is, and also trauma focused, specifically on the individual impact. But we also want to, take a look at understanding that there's also an experience, there's a cultural context that also happens as well. And so we know that trauma happens individually, but also within our community, and that also impacts the way that we look at different pieces and support systems as well. As you can see here on the on the left-hand side of your screen, you have the definition of what trauma experience is, right? So SAMHSA has a really nice definition. And then the National Center on Domestic Violence has another definition in regards to incorporating some of the cultural context. So it's really important for us to really marry those two so that we're able to provide the right support for our immigrant students. You know, in the next slide, there's a variation as well in the ways to approach in creating a trauma responsive environment. These are like the general pieces that we look at whenever we want to create a trauma-informed organization, right? So we do acknowledge that there is some kind of impact in that particular environment, individual, community. They recognize the signs and symptoms that are impacting that, that community. They also respond by creating effective systems and supports and procedures. And they also resist that re-traumatization from happening by creating these systems of support. But as I mentioned earlier, we all have a variety of different ways in approaching trauma responsive schools or responsive systems throughout the nation, right? So we know there's also different language that we use within our school system. So we have compassionate schools. We also have healing center engagement, resilient-oriented schools. And what we really want to look at is the whole child, whole school approach. But in terms of best practices, what we're looking at for immigrant students, schools that have successful newcomer programs have a system in place that encompasses the following areas. One is prior schooling and life experiences. And I'll give you kind of like a little bit of a personal experience. When I arrived to the United States, I knew no English, right? They didn't have English language learner programs that they have now. I came to the US in 1981 during the Salvadorian Revolution. And so I learned English, and I was actually sat in a corner. Actually, when I first arrived, I enrolled in a school and they didn't have enough space for me. So I was transferred to a different school that was about 45 minutes away from where I lived. And so, but they didn't take the time to really learn about my prior school, experience. I actually did not go to kindergarten because I was advanced in my reading and writing skills, but they didn't take the time to do that. But I know now there's so many different great programs that really take the time to understand what that particular student has experienced. So really learning about that prior school and life experience, creating a structure to support that learning as well. And then having a strong communication with students and their families. Alisa's going to talk about that, some of the different interventions that she's created throughout her school environment to be able to communicate with the families, providing that psychoeducation that somebody mentioned in the chat. And then also making sure that there's school mental health services that are culturally appropriate, right? Connecting them to the right language, removing that stigma from connecting those support systems. And also the community integration. I think overall, as a school system, we're creating welcoming school environments in general, right? But for our immigrant students, these are like the top 5 areas that we look at when it comes to best practices for supporting our students. In the next slide, it's also very important for us to understand what the journey looks like, right? So there is that traumatic exposure as you have the pre-migration, during the migration, the pre-migration is the country of origin. What types of experiences that individual had, then decided to travel and migrate to the United States. What does that migration process looks like, which is that journey component? And then once they get here, what does that experience look like for them? Now, these are they're not exhaustive. It's not an exhaustive list. It's just some things that we want to consider that students and families have experienced as they're migrating to the United States. So, an example would be the pre-migration process, which is the country of origin. They may have experienced, like Luis and Jose, they experienced some exposure to violence, right? During the protest, the father was murdered. They also may have experienced some type of torture, and also, or maybe some basic food, basic necessities, some resources. Once that they decide there is that migration process, then they go through an experience of, having a long and dangerous journey on foot. Some families may, live in different strange homes while they kind of transfer, go through the process of going through the different countries, right, traveling to the United States. Sometimes families may be coerced or blackmailed. They charge them a certain amount of money to get them to a certain location, and then all of a sudden the price gets increased if they want to cross to the next town or possibly, cross to the United States. Sometimes they might be blackmailed or forced to work off their journey off to the United States. And once they get to the United States, if the students are coming by themselves or they're, coming with an adult or a family member, they may experience, some fear with the immigration policies, possibly some health concerns, right? Because they've actually traveled a long journey and we don't know how, when was the last time they ate, what type of health conditions they were under. We know that migrating to the United States is very hot, right? They're very exhausted. And so it's very important for us to understand, some of the pieces that the triple trauma experience that our students and families experience. And so again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it gives you a good idea as far as like what, some of our families are experiencing through their journey to the United States. And as we're thinking about the kind of the concept of what happened to you, we want to start thinking about what's right to you, what's right with you, right? In the next slide, we're going to, we have this particular statement here. It says, what happened to you versus what's right with you, right? So we're going to think about some of the strengths and joys that all of our immigrant families, our students bring within their journey to the United States. And in this, the next slide, I'm going to pause a little bit and kind of think about it. And there's a lot of information, but as we're thinking about Luis and Jose, or some of our students that we're connecting with, what are some of the experiences that they went through? We invite you to jot it down in your learning tool, or you can actually write it in the chat. What experience, what are some of the triple trauma experiences that they've experienced throughout their journey, right? So I kind of took a little bit of notes, and as their journey, they, supporting some of the pieces, their long journey over to the United States, right? That was the other component that I saw in the video, that they experienced that triple trauma. Also, their journey in their country of origin, right? So they experience their father being killed, but also they experience not only just the father, but also just the community violence that they experience and their own their own threat, right? Because Mom talked about that piece, that she was threatened as well if she, didn't kind of back off from the investigation of that murder. So, but the other piece that we look at is some of the possible strengths and protective factors that Luis and Jose bring over, right? I kind of saw the excitement, the happiness, right? They kept saying, vamos a ir a la USA. They were so excited about connecting and coming to the US. The way that I think it was a social worker that was connecting and talked about the story is giving them, just reconnecting the hope that they have, right? Coming to the United States, a new life. So it was very exciting. They were very excited about coming to the United States. So it's, some of the strengths that we think about with the family. The other protective factor that I saw as well is Mom. Mom was very encouraging, in the process of them coming over here. So as we're thinking about some of the resources, so what are some ways that your school district is continuing to support? It's the same question that we've had before, but in regards to understanding the experience that our immigrant students are bringing over, right? So possibly maybe doing some training. This particular video, it's fantastic to use as a training resource, right? That's a really great opportunity to train some of the staff, some of the teachers, even like individuals that are working in the shelters, is really having helping to create that understanding of how their experience and some of their own behavior can actually contribute to the traumatic experience for those particular students coming over. So these are just some learning opportunities for us to kind of think about as well. So let me see if there are any questions in the chat so far. I know we're doing really, really great on time. So let me see if we have any questions in the chat before we get to our 5-minute stretch break. So one of the questions is, what are some developmental aspects to consider regarding protective factors? So any of the panelists are welcome to answer some of these questions if you have additional pieces to add. But in my experience, one of the areas that we look at for protective factors depends on the age of the individual. But with Lisa and Jose, some of the protective factors that I'm thinking about is their use of language, their connection to awareness. Those are some really, really great pieces that we look at as well. Those are some excellent protective factors. We also know that there are going to be some challenges with language. Somebody mentioned it as well in that piece is the language barriers. But I think it's really important to have individuals within our school systems to be able to provide those resources available to students as well. So I hope that answers that question. See if there's anything else in the chat. Okay, I think those are some of the questions that I see right now. What we're going to do right now is we're going to invite you to take a 5-minute stretch break. Go ahead and grab some water. I heard this new term today, take a bio break, right? Yes, and then we'll welcome you back at 4:06. So we'll give you guys about 5 minutes to check in with yourselves. Welcome back, everyone. I'm hoping that you had a nice stretch break. So we're going to continue on the next part of our webinar today. And so next we have Alicia, who's going to take us through the COVID nuances and considerations. So Alicia, if you can please unmute yourself.
Thank you so much, Angela. I hope everybody enjoyed their break. We are halfway through with this. I hope you find the following information useful. So my goal is to provide this information as it increases visibility for immigrant neighbors whom we know we exist, but to what extent? We know that there are over 18 million children in the United States who are children of immigrants. 1 out of every 4 children in the United States has at least one immigrant parent. And estimates note that 10 to 15% of children living in immigrant families exhibit symptoms of depression. In San Diego, which is where I'm located, binational students are those that move along the border, whether they live in Tijuana or they live in San Diego, and not limited to San Diego. Of course, we know that there's binational students all the way up to LA, at least as far as I'm aware. So our binational students are at a higher risk of depression and are less likely to expected to finish college than their peers and have less information about pursuing higher education. One of the points that I emphasize with my colleagues, whether it's at my site or wherever I'm collaborating, is that second bullet point, that 1 out of every 4 children in the United States has at least one immigrant parent. So you are here because you either work with immigrant families, and if you have yet to work with immigrant families, you will eventually work with an immigrant family. In the following slide, I would like to provide a disclaimer that I am not an MTSS expert, nor am I a coach. I have, however, implemented PBIS, which is one aspect of MTSS in 2 sites. Why is this important? Well, this is how utilizing a culturally adapted MTSS framework allowed us and my site to continue providing support to our students in a more systematic way while making the necessary shifts to address the challenges that COVID-19 brought forth. So as of March 2020, like many of you, we all pivoted, made a quick pivot and moved to distance learning. How did we make sure we were reaching all of our students and remained attuned to their needs? How did we shift to create a safe virtual classroom? Well, we utilized again an MTSS framework, and we utilized the data that was available to us to provide that, continuous improvement as we moved along with distance learning. So our teachers were recommended to, for example, add visuals, to their virtual classrooms, such as Sanctuary City or All Are Welcome Here, or for example, having the LGBTQ flag, as you can see here. It's very visible. I make sure that my students are aware that I am an ally and that I am here to uphold their rights to a quality of life. Another thing that they were encouraged to do in the tier 1 level is our teachers to continue providing those social emotional learning opportunities in their morning check-ins or somehow throughout the day. To not assume that every teacher was providing a check-in. You don't know if nobody provided a check-in throughout the day. So providing them with different prompts didn't have to be complicated. They could just be basic rating scales, such as where is your level of happiness today, or how excited are you for the day from 0 to 10. And from there, we were still able to gauge how were our students feeling. When we saw concerning numbers, we set in place a protocol in which the teachers could refer the students to us, and the students were made aware that the teachers would be doing this if there were any flags of concerns. We also amped our check-in opportunities. Our counseling department really made sure that we were sharing appointment request electronic forms to our students so that they knew how to find us. We got Instagram accounts. We made sure that our forms were easy to find within our Instagram accounts. And of course, this allowed us to keep data. We might deduct from local data, other than one of the things that MTSS emphasizes is making data informed decisions. So not only did we utilize the data that we have of our students or demographics and how many students were requesting assistance, but it was very important to understand our community. In San Diego, we have a big immigrant population, not just because we're in the border, but we're also a military city. So we have folks from all over the country and the world. Specific to my site, some of my students are apprehensive to disclosing their status, whether they're binational, whether they're immigrant. So doing these things that I've mentioned can provide or increase that sense of safety, even as we move into distance learning. Again, the importance of keeping data, even if you don't have a data system in place, going through your emails, if you had more student support requests in the last week, then what is that telling you, right? What is it saying about your community and their needs? In the next slides, we can see that the numbers show us that our immigrant students and students with immigrant parents are disproportionately affected by the pandemic, especially when we acknowledge that immigrants are a historically underserved population. And these represent compounding issues. Not only are our students navigating their world as children of immigrants, potentially even first generations, but also with little support depending on the level of technology literacy in the home. In the graph here, you see a study that was done in the summer of how much our immigrant or low-income communities or low-income students depend on paper resources provided by the school. You can see that as you go higher in the income bracket, of course, they rely a little less, but in my community specifically, we are predominantly low-income families, so our families really depended on these paper resources. California has an average a K-12 population of 6.1 million, and 1.5 million students have an immigrant parent, not including students whose status is unknown or who are binational. Again, why is this important? Because you don't need to have students tell you that they are immigrant or they are binational. Simply understanding that your geopolitical location can tell you a lot of what your community or your students need. So as we shifted into online learning, we inadvertently removed access to education for many of our students. So what we needed to do and what we increased is that we provided the information to the teachers, right? What are we going to do with the students that don't have printers at home, or that don't have, PDF editing abilities, or students who suddenly lose their internet for one reason or another? Our binational students may not have access to the internet 24/7. So it was important for us as a school to continue closing that gap. Even as we begin the reopening of some of our schools, it is important to make sure that our students are aware that they can ask for paper resources, that our teachers have scanning abilities, that they scan anything that they can legally scan for distribution. And of course, just keeping in mind that just because we reopen schools, it doesn't mean that the barriers are completely eliminated. One of the other things that we made sure we did in the following slide, you can see on the right side, I created this postcard style resource list when we found out that we were going to move into distance learning. My first thought was, what about our low-income students? What about our students with food and housing insecurity? In my community specifically, we had one of the highest rates of unemployment, especially because many of our parents work in the restaurant sector. So what happened when COVID hit? Many of them were laid off. So we made sure they knew where the local food banks and nonprofits were, so that they could access free food. We added mental health resources. We added the general 211 line. We also added our Instagram pages and other Instagram pages for additional assistance. So one of the things that you can do for your schools is create this and make sure you update it, because we know that not always, that these resources aren't always available, or they move location. If you are not able to hand this to your students, of course, in person, when our students went home, we made sure they got it. But for the students that were absent on the last day of school at the beginning of the pandemic, we made sure we mailed it home. We posted it on our social media. We send it through mail. So utilizing various modes of communication. I know that we do have many mental health personnel in here, and as well we do have teachers and administrators that are here that may or may not have access to a counselor or social worker. If you don't have access to a social worker or counselor, perhaps establishing a community committee. You don't need a big team, maybe a team of 2 or 4 people who routinely put something like this together. Keep a working binder in which you can also include a tab specifically to your immigrant community, where you keep your resources on your local ACLU, or you might print the policies that Claudia shared with us earlier, so that you can refresh your memory, because we're not legal experts, so it's easy to forget, what did this policy mean? So if you'd like to print this and put it in that section as a resource, that would be a good thing to do. You don't need to rely on your school social worker or your school counselor to have access to these resources. So as I mentioned previously, in the next slide, please, we want to make sure that we are reaching all of our students, and we don't assume that everyone checks their email or has access to Wi-Fi 24/7. For example, in my school, I know that one of our parents needed to leave their cell phone behind because our student did not have access to internet in the beginning of the pandemic. So We knew that the teacher was not going to receive a phone call if we had an all-call announcement for the day. So we needed to make sure, again, to post to social media, to send it through email in multiple places, like multiple avenues. In San Diego, for example, I know that my binational students may not have access to the internet 24/7 when they're in Tijuana. So we continued to utilize, again, the several modes of communication. We also considered, when planning different events such as town hall meetings, parent nights, how would this impact our immigrant student population and their parents, including our binational students, because I do work 5 miles from the border. Will my transporter students have a difficult time accessing this? How do I eliminate barriers for them? Do I have all information readily available if we have to sign papers? Do I have a mode that allows for electronic signature? At the beginning of the year, when we handed out laptops, we had students that, because of the pandemic, had to move to Tijuana because their parents could no longer afford rent here. And the border is still closed as of today. So some of those parents couldn't even cross the border to sign the agreement for our computers. So I needed to make sure we had this form available for signature, for electronic signature, and even kind of relax our requirements when it came to returning papers. A picture of the document was sufficient for us. We also would consider that not all parents can assist our outdoor orientations or back to school nights, especially now that we are reopening schools. They may not have a car or work schedules that work. So are we live streaming? I think it's a great thing that we realize that Zoom, for example, and live streaming abilities can actually allow us to reach more families, because they may not have a car for the night, or they don't want to drive, they're at work, etc., etc. So considering the fear of how the virus impacted our communities can really inform us in how we will continue providing information without exposing any of our families and our immigrant families to the virus. Some of our families may not have access to healthcare, and again, because of public charge and what they know of what happens when you try to access medical care if you're not a U.S. citizen. So we don't want to isolate our families, and therefore we should find any mode of access for them so that they are included in our communities. So here I provide a couple of examples. Let's say I have a student who is binational and isn't able to make it to our outdoor senior event because they're living in Tijuana due to losing housing in San Diego, and it is too late to cross the border. So what I do is I advocate, can we have the event earlier in the day, because we don't want our students navigating borders when it's dark time, and we also want our students to be included in events. Or another example, an uninsured immigrant parent does not feel comfortable attending outdoor drive-in orientation. The school has this as the only option. What do? Well, again, we live stream, we recorded, and then we shared with families. We don't make that the only opportunity for the families to have information or be connected to the school. So these are a few of the interventions that we implemented at my site when we had to close due to distance learning. We definitely expect that we continue using this as the days pass, even as we fully reopen, because it did increase our connection to our communities and families. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Alicia, for the wonderful information and intervention and your advocacy and with the students that you work with. There are a couple of questions in the chat, and see if you can add some responses to this. Have you had any families that you have not been able to reach? And if you have, like, what are some ways that, besides like the Facebook and Instagram, Are there any other additional interventions or recommendations that you have utilized to reach out to families that you were not able to connect with?
Yes, definitely home visits. I know that for some of us, that's not a possibility, but when we couldn't reach a student, we provided the home visit. If a home visit was not possible, we called the emergency contact, and we would later find that the phone number was outdated. And I always come from a place of curiosity with our families. I know that sometimes some of our families are a bit resistant to the assistance, but if we inform them what our intention are, we're honest about what our concern is, then we would then have more success.
Thank you. And another question that was posted on the chat as well is that, clearly there's a lot of immediate needs that still are lingering. You made an excellent point as far as like, even though we've actually reopened schools, the barriers still haven't, gone away or been removed. Actually, some of the barriers have actually been exacerbated, right? So families have lost their jobs, their housing, they have to move, so different things like that. So do you have any suggestions for setting up a framework of support for students and families that have negatively been impacted?
Definitely, we rely on surveys so much. So we would, whenever we want to understand what is it that we need, or whenever I want to bring in a new service, well, first of all, it's really important that you are hopefully connected to your local nonprofit organization. We are very lucky in San Diego. We have many of them, and we have very big nonprofit organizations, which I'm connected to, but always sending out surveys, again, surveys that are translated into whatever languages are spoken in your community. And that can really help you understand what is it that you need, so you can therefore implement or bring in community supports, because we can't do it all, right? Like, I wish I could, but we need help as well. Also, again, that constant reminder through social media that we're here to help, this is what we can do, or doing random check-ins. That's how we've been able to kind of spread the word that there is assistance, and sharing our county newsletter when the rental assistance programs were passed in the last month. I made sure I emailed those. I made sure that I posted that on Instagram, and I called people who I kind of had an idea that were in need of rental assistance.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that information. As I was kind of thinking about that particular question, I just jotted down some ideas, because I, prior to me starting this position, I was an administrator at a school district. And one of the things that we did is we hosted a Zoom meeting for our families, for parents. And one of the things that we committed to is that we had our parent leaders. Of course, it had to be in a safe environment, but they're the ones that were spreading out the information for us. Like, hey, these are our top 5 parent leaders. Please share this information with your families. They would share them on WhatsApp, on Facebook, on Instagram. So they were really connected to the community, any kind of like resources. The other thing that I thought about as well is that the County of Orange has an initiative, a school mental health initiative, and it's a short-term initiative, but it's really nice because what they did is they created a promotora project. And so they're training parent leaders in the community in the aspects of mental health. And then within that framework, they actually have different, almost like leaders of each of the different topics. So one is specifically geared towards mental health, the other one's on housing, navigating those resources. And so it's really connecting to those parent leaders that can get us, get the information out, right? To connect to the families, to the students, and all of those different resources. But, kind of going back to the setting up the frameworks, we do have 2 more sessions, part of the learning series, where we're going to talk about some of the different types of interventions that you can actually create within your school districts as well. So, please join us for the next session, which is going to be May 17th, and we'll talk more specifically about how to engage and create those frameworks as well. There is one more thing that I thought about in regards to access to like basic care. but also healthcare. One of the community hospitals actually created a free initiative as well, where they had a COVID emergency response. So any family that was impacted, they contracted COVID, they assigned a nurse, a clinician, or a licensed clinical social worker to connect with that family immediately, so that they can actually, provide some of the immediate basic care and support, and then do that friendly handoff to additional support. So, just like Alicia mentioned, we can't do it by ourselves. It's really connecting with our partners in the community to be able to create these systems to support our families as we start to navigate, reentry or coming back to school campuses as well. So thank you, Alicia, and all those wonderful questions from our participants today. And so the last portion of our webinar today is that we're going to have Claudia Rojas talk to us about student development and triple resilience. So Claudia, you can unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for the reminder to unmute. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you got it.
All right. So thank you, Angela. So one of the themes that came up and what's been shared is that of resilience. Let's talk about it. First, let's review a definition of resilience, which states, resilience is a process of navigating through adversity using internal and external resources, such as personal qualities, relationships, and environmental and contextual factors to support healthy adaptation, recovery, and successful outcomes over the life course. I want for you to think about how resilience impacts the development for immigrant students as I proceed with my presentation. Next. So when we think about development for our immigrant students in schools, it's very important to have an orientation process in place for students. The minute that they enroll, we should have staff that's designated, as well as student ambassadors that are there to support the student in navigating those first few days of school. This includes letting students know which academic supports exist in and outside of the classroom. Schools that have implemented restorative justice practices can facilitate community building circles that will allow our immigrant students to make connections with each other and the adults who support them. In fact, today, in the ELD classes that I support, we continued our series of community building circles that began at the beginning of the school year. And by now, most of our students are very comfortable sharing and expressing their feelings. Today's topic was around student migration journeys. And some students spoke about leaving family members who raised them and then meeting new family members once they arrived. Others spoke about the violence they experienced while migrating, including kidnapping and sexual assault. As you can imagine, these stories were really difficult to listen to. However, we had 7 adults in the circle who also shared their experiences as well as words of hope and encouragement. And at the end of class, each student who shared received a follow-up phone call by our psychiatric social worker who was also in the circle. So it's important to have, again, the right people in place if you're gonna engage in these sort of conversations that are very powerful and healing for our students. Next, our teachers should also strive to create a curriculum that's, Livia, yes, thank you. Our teachers should also strive to create a culturally relevant curriculum for our students that also highlights survival stories that will inspire hope and joy. Another strategy that works to help in the development of immigrant students is to implement a peer mentoring program where students who have been in the country longer can then mentor students who have recently arrived. Of course, art education programs and leadership conferences are other opportunities that schools can provide for immigrant students. Leadership conferences attract media attention where our students can share their stories on different outlets, again, giving them that voice, empowering them. And lastly, schools should encourage the immigrant students join in extracurricular activities, especially those which focus on cultural pride, immigrant rights, language development, and community projects. And if your school doesn't offer these, then it should be time to get together and determine which adults can be advisors for such extracurricular activities. Next slide, please. So a major aspect of developing immigrant students and building their resistance is to focus on their self-esteem. This can be done by inspiring hope, happiness, imagination, aspirations, and trust. As has been mentioned previously, it's really important to remind our immigrant youth that they are more than just what happened to them. We have to humanize their experiences and practice a healing-centered approach. One that includes culture, spirituality, civic action, and collective healing. And we saw examples of that in the video that was shown at the beginning. Next slide. If we do all of this, all the aforementioned, we are then going to be able to help our students in developing what we call triple resilience. So just as Angela shared earlier, our immigrant students will experience triple trauma and can consequently also develop triple resilience. Once our immigrant students begin to heal, they begin to gain self-confidence, self-worth, and autonomy. Again, it's not to say that they didn't possess any of these qualities before they experienced their trauma, but after having experienced trauma, it really is our responsibility to help them remember their sense of purpose, resourcefulness, and optimism. They possess all of this. And the easiest way for us to do this is by helping them gain academic success now that they have arrived and are getting used to a new school system, and also by motivating them to remain goal-oriented. Next slide, please. So more strategies for our school staff to support immigrant students are to ensure that academic expectations match academic ability. In other words, please do not automatically enroll students into remedial classes or conversely, right, into advanced courses until proper assessments with various ways of demonstrating academic ability have been administered. School staff, we have to be empathetic and understanding that our students might struggle with certain tasks that other students don't find difficult. For example, navigating different distance learning apps. Today, I spent about 20 minutes helping one of my students and his mother fill out the online form to schedule a COVID test appointment, which is required for him to return to campus. Again, as Alicia was mentioning, right, having staff available to help with these kind of what might seem easy for most families, but might be difficult for our immigrant families is very critical. Giving students a heads up on what they can expect is key. Again, having an orientation process as soon as they arrive to your school is very helpful in being able to do this. So I want all of us, including myself, let's pause, let's take a deep breath and realize that we're not the first school or the first organization to be supporting immigrant youth. And because of that, thankfully, right, we have many successful models to learn from. I encourage you to please stay in touch with each other. I've been taking screenshots of the chat, people's names and their organizations. I'm gonna look them up afterwards. And also, we encourage you to please join our extended learning program this summer, where we're gonna continue coming together and learning together. As has been mentioned before, none of us who are presenting are the experts. In fact, I don't really like that word. We're just coming from the field. We're bringing our experiences together and we're learning from each other. And that's what we'll continue to do in our summer program. So please join if you're available. And then when planning lessons, we encourage teachers to practice sensitivity and provide our students with support if you feel that certain topics may be trauma reminders. So as I mentioned earlier, when we planned our community building circles, we made sure that we had, many adults in the space that could help. Or you can also do what Angela did at the beginning of this session today, right? Offering safe spaces when discussing these topics, making sure that in our case, when we do this as well, we have breakout rooms available. So a student, if they're feeling triggered by a topic and they kind of need to like walk away from the conversation, they can go into they can chat, send us a message in the chat and go into a breakout with one of the adults just to make sure that they're okay. So having these safe spaces is really important. And of course, before doing any of this that I have mentioned, it's important to have our mental health professionals as part of the planning, so that they're prepared to support our students who are demonstrating any concerning behavior. And so that's why in this series, we have our 3 mental health professionals who have already presented, and then myself. I don't have those important skills, right? That skill set. I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, but I work side by side with our psychiatric social worker, with our school counselors, to make sure that we're working in tandem to support all of our students and their needs. And next slide, please. Thank you. I want us to also think about what organization tools can be in place for immigrant students. So first and foremost is to listen to them. I know this seems really obvious, but many times we get bogged down with our day-to-day responsibilities, which, by the way, have increased during distance learning. So sometimes, I know I'm guilty of this, I forget to sometimes just sit, just pause and listen to my students and what they're saying, what they're sharing, what their needs are. And when I take the time to do so, as I'm sure you know, right, they feel that we understand them. It's easier for us to be able to help them, and especially to help them remain optimistic, right, and give them new opportunities now that they're here. Again, I want to stress the importance of humanizing their experiences, empowering them by giving them voice. It's critical that all our stakeholders, not just our teachers, everybody at the school site or at the organization, right, receive effective professional development to provide strategies to work with immigrant students. And it's equally critical to hire adults who practice an anti-racist pedagogy, where courageous spaces in and out of the classroom are the norm. This is really important to make sure you bring on board the adults that are doing the daily work, right, to have this anti-racist pedagogy. And then finally, we want to make sure that you inform your stakeholders that are working with our immigrant youth about secondary traumatic stress, making sure that they know what it is, that they can also begin to experience their own symptoms, and making sure that we're providing resources if they are experiencing such symptoms in order to avoid burnout. And then our next slide. So lastly, I want us to think about how to engage our parents and our families of newcomer students. And again, this has already been mentioned, but we want to make sure to really think about some of these points, right? So let's work together to help our parents understand the effect that trauma has had on their child. I love the video that we chose for this series because it shows, from a firsthand perspective, the mother's experience and how she's, able to have these conversations with her sons about something so traumatic that happened to their family. I can't even imagine as a mother, right, how that must feel, knowing that her children experienced or witnessed, right, the murder of her husband, of their father. And so it's really important that our parents, whether they were with our students when they migrated, or if they're, meeting them sometimes for the first time in many years, that they are aware of the trauma. It's also important that we help our parents and our families create those safe spaces at home, right? So just like we create them at school or at our organizations, we want to teach our families how they can do that in their home and help their children manage their emotions and their behaviors. By helping our families support the new relationships that their newcomer students will develop, it's also key, right? And this can be gauged by how strong our relationships are with the families that we work with, right? And so helping our families do this is critical. And then again, just like we train our staff to help our students understand their own journey from a strength-based perspective, we have to also do this and train our families to do the same for their child, right? So again, recognizing the difficulty, right? The trauma that has taken place, but then being able to humanize that experience and think of it from a strength-based perspective, and giving our families multiple opportunities to advocate for their children. For example, right, holding seats on parent committees at school sites is very important, right? Because once they gain that seat, right, they're going to be trained in the different processes that they can learn and advocate for their students. And then finally, we must support our families in being partners, again, with their mental health professionals, so that our newcomer students receive a treatment plan if necessary. So again, working in tandem with our mental health support staff, and making sure that our families are in constant communication with them is key, especially if they do need a treatment plan. And that's about it. I'm going to pass it back to Angela.
Thank you, Claudia. You know, I love all the words that you mentioned about just working together, and then also giving us that space and that support that we're all on this. You know, this is a learning process for all of us, especially like pivoting and navigating new systems within, distance learning. There's no questions in the chat, but I kind of got curious myself. Like, how were you able to get the buy-in from the schools that you worked in to create these systems to support immigrant students?
Well, I'm really lucky to work at a school site where, well, number one, we have a large newcomer population, right? That's why I'm there. And so when I was hired and assigned to the school, it was like, oh my gosh, we're so happy, right? Because there aren't many of my positions in our district. And so it was really, it came from a place of need, first of all. And then once, I was able to virtually, right, sit in meetings and begin to, scope out what my work would look like, and, which teachers needed the most support and coaching, where the majority of newcomer students are cohorted, right? Then it was just a matter of really plugging myself in, building those relationships. Again, I can't stress enough how important those relational skills are, right? Gaining the trust of teachers, of students, of parents. Once you're able to do that, then I'm not going to say the work becomes easy, because it's never easy, but it just really helps to facilitate having, again, the students' needs at the forefront, so that your scope of work is really defined that way.
Thank you for sharing that. I think, kind of like what Alicia was mentioning back in the MTSS, is like really utilizing that data to create the systems and the support that's needed for that particular school site. But also, one of the things that I always kind of think about, I think in words, and one of the words that kind of came to mind is the innovation, right? So being innovative with the creation of different systems to be able to support students in general, but also creating a support system for immigrant students. And I really wanted to just kind of highlight what you mentioned in development for immigrant students, which is that the orientation process. That's very, very helpful. So they know like the systems, they know what to expect, like the expectations, because what we know to address trauma, those are some different types of interventions, is knowing what the schedule looks like, and I kind of think about my experience in being in a school setting. I had no idea what was going on, right? So it's like the language, and then I just, even now, like the way that how I learned English is I actually just watched people talk, right? And we would watch TV or watch people talk, and that's how I learned. But knowing the structure is very important. So that orientation process is very important, right? So creating those systems. Yeah. But I really also enjoy that you said that, we're bringing a perspective here. We have somebody from LA Unified, We have San Diego County and then Orange County as well, to bring that perspective, right? So to bring all those pieces together and joining us in the community of practice so that we can learn together, continue to learn together in the process of developing some of these support systems. So thank you, Claudia.
You're welcome. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you. So the last few minutes that we have in the next slide, we're gonna, summarize. We had a nice journey conversation about, policies, how they impact our students and the families that we work with. We also talked about the impact of triple trauma in our students and the importance of us knowing and understanding these pieces. And as we're thinking about, wrapping up this session today, is reflecting on some of the joys and strengths that our students bring in, right? So earlier we started off with having a conversation of, families come from all over the world, they bring in their customs, traditions, and really enjoying that process with them as well. So as you're thinking about your own school district, your community agency that you work with, what are some ways as far as what some of the takeaways that you took today to document, to enhance some of these support systems, but also to recognize some of the joys and strengths that our students, bring to us, and how do we capitalize on those pieces? So those are some, important pieces that we want you to, think about. In the next slide, we also want you to kind of think about, as we're coming to a close, what are some action steps that you're going to do, right? So maybe you can jot down a couple of different ideas, maybe joining us in our next, session, right? Or even joining the community of practice by bringing in a case scenario and then having a discussion about that. You can actually write it in your reflection tool, or you can actually write it in the chat box, right? So having some of those different conversations about that piece. But our next session, we're going to be inviting you to the next session, which is May 17th, where we're going to talk specifically about fronterismo, supporting transborder school mental health, and what are some of those different systems and resources that are available to students. In the next slide, we also show the invitation to joining us on June 21st, where Claudia Rojas and myself are going to talk about some really innovative systems that we created in our previous jobs. When I was at a school social worker, I integrated and provided CBITs to our newcomer population. And it was so successful. So we'll talk about some of those experiences and share some of those resources as well. And we're, again, Claudia talked about this learning invitation to join us in the series, which is going to be held on Mondays from 3:15 to 4:30, July 12th, 19th, 26th, and August 2nd. So please, you can join us for one, for all. We're welcoming everybody to come and join us to have a discussion, have a nice discussion and a learning opportunity for everyone as well. In the next session, in the next slide, we also have additional events of interest that you may be interested in. So we have Wellness Wednesdays, SCRR Memorialization and Commemoration, SCRR Summer Institute. And if you can click on the link, you can actually get more information to learn more about these different resources as well. The next piece, we just want to remind you that you are going to be receiving the recording, and also all of the handouts were provided today are going to be sent over to you as well. And also the last piece is that you will be receiving a certificate of completion as well, and there's some information connected to that. Also, in the last piece as well, please also fill out the evaluation. We welcome any kind of recommendations, suggestions. We really want to know more information about how we can best support the work that you do in your communities. And we really, really want to thank you for your time here today. And we hope that you join us on May 17th. And we're so excited to see you again. So thank you so much for your participation today. Thank you, everybody. Yes, we can actually, we will get to that link with a follow-up email in regards to all of the different upcoming webinars our seminars that are coming up as well. So thank you so much and have a wonderful evening, everybody. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Barbara. We're so excited that you're going to join us next time. Have a great evening, everybody. Thank you so much. Thank you. Awesome, Julia. We're so excited to see you again. Thank you. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, Alejandra, for joining us today. See you next time. Have a wonderful evening.